Greetings, I am Herbert Erpaderp, and I've got foam. It's not quite the same as having wood, is it? Anyway, today, as you might assume by looking at the title, or this image here, I'm going to lay some track bed, and for that, I'm using Track Bed. This is of course a product from Woodland Scenics, as you can see on the packaging, and I'm sure there are plenty of other fine options for track bed, like cork or something else. You could also just lay the track directly onto the baseboard. There are many ways to model railway, and I've obviously chosen this. I figured it would help deaden train sound, though that's not really a big issue for me, and I also thought it might make things look a bit more interesting just to have the track raised up off the board a bit. I've decided against using a layer of foam on the baseboard, so there won't be any terrain going below the baseboard level, and this might help make things look a little bit less flat. But that is, of course, something for future Herbert to worry about. Today is for laying track bed, and I should really start by saying that this is not intended as a tutorial. I've never done track bed before, but if you do find this helpful, that's awesome. Though this is really just an update to share my progress. Rather than trying to eyeball this, and then just going ham like I would have as a kid, not that I actually had the patience to wait until I could afford track bed as a kid, but I decided that it was a fine idea to mark out where I want the track to go, and thus the track bed. To mark out corners, I bought this compass. It's definitely not big enough, and rather than going over to the hardware to get a dowel the size of the tube that came with it, I made use of what I had. A dowel that's too thin, which necessitated blue tack to hold it in place. It is kind of dodgy, and you wouldn't use this for anything professional, but it works good enough for this. I measured 20mm in from the edge of the board, just so that I wouldn't have the track sitting right at the edge. Hopefully this will make any derailments a little bit less disastrous. I marked the corners, starting with the outermost edge. I guess really the outer edge is all I would have needed, but I also marked out the center parts. I did a bit of measuring and pondering with both some rough cutouts of my points, and the actual points themselves, in order to figure out how close together the track bed should be. I'm hoping to get away without having to put a tiny bit of track between the points on the crossovers. It looks to me like connecting the diverging lines directly to each other would make it so the track isn't quite dead center on the track bed. I'm pretty sure it would make the tracks the correct distance apart, just not centered on the track beds. It's probably not super important anyway. I figured marking the lines around the inside of the oval would help to ensure things are fairly neat, but I wasn't really thinking about it too hard. Pretty much all of the straight parts will have 3 tracks and not 2. Oh well, I quickly got to actually sticking the foam to the wood, which is what we're here for. I started on the straight sections, where the 2 baseboards will join. This track bed comes in rolls or strips, and I'm using strips. If you're using the rolls, you can pretty much stick down as much as you like, but with the strips, I figured it made sense to work in lengths the strips come in. I'm using Gorilla wood glue here. I'm sure there are plenty of other options for gluing this stuff down, but this is what I have and it does work pretty well. I put enough glue to stick down the entire length of track bed that I need, and then I spread it out using a card. Before you get too excited, this is a prepaid gift credit card with no money on it. I spread the glue out fairly thin, and then I put down the track bed. I do this fairly carefully. You do get a little bit of working time to make adjustments with this, but not a whole lot. Though if you put the glue on a bit thicker, you get a bit more working time. Laying the straight sections here is quite easy. Here you can see I've put down 2 strips. It took a few moments for my brain to tick over and go, "Hey Herbert, you need 3 there." In this shot you can see that I've got 3 straight sections on both sides of the first board. Well, you can only see one side, and only sort of, but they are there. I also thought a bit more about what I was doing, and it occurred to me that the passing loop for the front side, which is the side I'm working on here, is on the outer edge of the board, not the inside. So I did have to rekajigger things a bit, but that's okay. I just drew some more lines, and laid the curved sections along those. This is fairly simple. I do suspect that you're meant to cut this stuff down the center for corners, but I found it worked fine without doing that. And it's a lot less work that way. As you can see, I've used a couple of cans as weights where I've needed them. There's no need to buy anything fancy for this. I put the 2 main lines in first, and they're almost certainly not perfectly consistent in radius, but they look good enough. This is obviously not going to be the part that anybody sees, and most of the curves are going to be hidden in tunnels anyway. For some reason, I didn't film myself gluing down the section where the passing loop branches off the outer main line, but it wasn't anything too tricky. Eventually, I connect the two halves of the curve. I've used a bit more glue here to give myself a little more working time, and this means the can weights were needed, or the foam could slide right out of place, which isn't really ideal. The result I got is obviously not perfectly neat, but I'm sure it'll work just fine. Here I'm adding a little extra for the rear passing loop, which is obviously on the inside of the oval. I don't think I'll need quite this much track bed under the points here, but it's probably better to have a bit too much than not enough. I got the track bed onto the second baseboard, and then roughly joined them together. I didn't bolt them up because I didn't want to get any glue between the baseboards. This is probably a problem. I did notice a slight difference in height when I built the baseboards, but I didn't think it was quite this drastic. Maybe it's different when they're bolted up, I don't know. Anyway, it does look kind of major when you look closely. I might have to put some shims under the tracks to make them about the same height or something. The way I'm going to lay the tracks across the baseboard join is by laying lengths of flex track across the gaps, soldering the rails to screws, and then cutting at the gap. Hopefully, that's enough to make a nice smooth connection between the boards. It's definitely something for future Herbert to worry about though. Poor bastard. What's life without a challenge, I suppose? Eventually, I got enough track bed down, though not all of it. There are going to be some industrial sidings in the middle of the oval, but being a very, very smart man, I didn't actually buy enough track bed. There was only just enough for the main lines, but that's okay. The sidings in the middle were always going to have to wait anyway, and I've got enough track bed down that I can start laying track on my main lines. It doesn't look the greatest, especially on corners. However, it is flat, well, except for that join at the front of the layout, but at least the join on the other side is a lot better. It's ready for track, and it should do a fine job of holding that track. At least that's what I assume. It may be totally horrible and catch fire when I try to put the track down. I guess we'll find out soon enough. And that's what's happening next. That is the track, not the fire, I hope. It is going to be a fair while before I get all of the track down, but at least I'm able to start now. I think I'm going to start by installing the main lines and passing loops on one board first, and then the other, and then I'll join them, and then, eventually, I'll install the industrial sidings in the centre. Why not do it all at once? Mostly because points and point motors are expensive, and I've not bought them all yet, and I assume it would be tricky, if not impossible, to install point motors after fixing the points and other track in place. So it kind of necessitates buying a whole bunch of stuff up front, and I'm sure anybody in the hobby will tell you that's not cheap. I do think I've got enough flex track for everything though, so I'm well on my way. For anyone interested, I've decided to use Pico Code 55 track and Unifrog points. There's not a whole lot of variety available in Unifrog points yet, but there's enough and it seems like the best choice. Anyway, I think I might have waffled enough. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to put them in the comment section below. And if you've not already done so, why not subscribe here on YouTube for the low price of $0? What a bargain! Or, if you have the means and you want to help a Herbert Erpaderp do Herbert Erpaderp things, like buying track, and see my videos a bit early without any ads, consider becoming a patron. You can find links to Patreon, and all of my other things like Discord and social media, in the description below. As always, I shall return soon, so until then, be excellent to each other, have an amazing day, and thanks for watching. Farewell.